to Heritage Day, and a very special occasion. We've already had one speaker from Allen County this morning, who was Mr. Paul Dalton. And our second speaker was born in Allen County in 1865. That's all right. We're just starting. So I'll start over again. Our second speaker was born in Allen County in 1865. She doesn't look that old, of course. She moved away from Allen County after her father died, and she went to Louisville to a Mason Masonic Lodge school, and stayed there, and then went to college, got her degree, came back to Allen County and taught at Holland and Scottsville for a while. She's best known for being the very first female to be elected to statewide office in Kentucky. By that election, she became the Secretary of State for the state of Kentucky in 1921, and she served in that capacity until 1927. After that, she was elected state treasurer, so she won another statewide election, and served from 1927 to 1931. After that, she was the state librarian and archivist, and she was also the park director, and she created the first state parks in Kentucky. Her portrait hangs with 16 other remarkable women in our capital in Frankfort. So this is a very special lady. She's going to tell us today about her life and her accomplishments, and her struggle for women, for equality, and she shattered the glass ceiling that previous women had encountered. Please express your pride in her and her historic accomplishments of this courageous woman, and welcome her back home, your fellow Allen Countian, Emma Guy Cromwell.
My own father and mother lived for me in the words and recollection of others more than my own. My father, Ashley Guy, died when I was only 8 years old. My father was a Mason, and his friends convinced my mother, Alice Quisenberry, to send me to the Masonic home and orphanage home in Louisville. So I attended school there for 5 years, graduated, and then it was on to college for me. I read and studied government, passed my examinations, received my diploma at Howard College in Gallatin, Tennessee. Afterwards, I taught as assistant principal at the Allen County Male and Female College here in Scottsville, which was located right up in the basement of the Scottsville Baptist Church. I also taught for a while in Mount Zion up in Holland, the Holland community. I'm sure you all are aware of where that's located. That was back in 1891. But my main interest was still in government, and I gravitated in that direction. The office of state librarian was only one of the state positions deemed suitable for a woman. The other positions were thought to be way too past a woman's capability. I was delighted when I was elected by the legislature as the state librarian in 1896. I learned quickly that women in public office were judged by different standards than men. I was introduced to one legislator that I remember. He said that I was pretty as a speckled pup. I just had to swallow my tongue when he said that. I know he intended it as a compliment, and I extended my thanks, but it wasn't easy. I was 27 years old, pretty as a speckled pup. I became the librarian on the first day of June, and 1 year later I was married to Mr. William Cromwell. He was an attorney from Frankfurt. He was a man imbued with genuine Kentucky hospitality. But my comparatively brief married life held the only true contentment that my life would ever know. My childhood home had been broken up by my parents' death, and my career had been one of a struggle, far more than that of an average girl. After my librarian term ended, I welcomed the calm, quiet life at home, and had it continued, I would have never sought another public career. I was happy at home. But I returned to public service after 7 years when my husband died. I became the enrolling clerk and later the parliamentarian of the Kentucky State Senate. Those positions allowed me to become very acquainted with the members of our General Assembly. With full suffrage being a reality for women, by 1923, everyone was seriously asking, what can a woman do? What would it mean to our nation? What would it mean to our state? And the changes were on the horizon as the sun of a new freedom rose above the clouds. Individual women were seriously asking, would it be best for a woman to run for office? Well, my thoughts turned to what I could do. And I took counsel with Mr. John Noel, one of our leading financiers. He was well known for his keen and logical thinking. He listened to me as I talked to him, and he just looked at me and he said, Mrs. Cromwell, have you ever thought of leaving well enough alone? As it turned out, I couldn't leave things well enough alone. The very first to formally approach me on this subject was Dr. Louis Harmon. He was president of the Business College over in Bowling Green. You all know that he's a native of our Settle community here in Scottsville. He was the college president there, and he came to see me to tell me that he had heard my name mentioned as a probable candidate for Secretary of State. He added that he hoped that I would consider this because many of his friends, judging from my previous service as state librarian, were anxious for me to follow this distinction of being the first woman to hold an elective office in the state of Kentucky. I deliberated very seriously. I asked him for time to consider this and to think. I sought counsel from senators and judges and other people of prominence. And to my surprise, they all believed I could win. And they counseled me to go ahead. So my formal announcement was made in early spring. It was my belief that one seeking office or any other end should not delegate such an important task. I had to do it. If mistakes are to be made, it's better for the one most interested to make them. If promises are to be called for, it's best for the one to fulfill them to make them. One can keep one's path straighter than any other person. It may seem odd to you today that one of my generation felt strange about seeing her own face staring at her when she went down the streets. It seemed necessary for a great number of posters with my picture on them to be placed on telephone poles, trees, in all sorts of public places. I remember one time I was on the train and this lady said to me, "Hey lady, I beg your pardon, but aren't you the candidate for Secretary of State? I see your picture everywhere. You're in the bank, you're in the businesses, you're certainly on every telephone pole in our community. You're certainly well advertised. Me and my folks are going to vote for you. And hey, would you mind to sign this card for my little girl?" Allen County was where my girlhood during my mother's life was spent. Mr. Roscoe Huntsman and Miss Ed Welch headed my organization in the county. It seemed that every citizen, regardless of party, was interested in attending the meetings held on my behalf. From Allen County, I went over to Bowling Green, where the faculty and student body of Western Normal, headed by President H.H. Cherry, were all my loyal supporters. The business college with Dr. Louis Harmon and Murray Hill were very active for me from the start. One of the hardest issues for me to face was that women were trying to get jobs that rightly belonged to men. There was some point to that, and it had to be met with tact, for certainly we were doing just that. We were running for an office that had always been held by a man. Some women took the same stand. All of us were prone to measure by our own yardstick, and some women felt themselves safe and comfortable at home. They couldn't see why anyone would want to leave that safe haven, such a great shelter for the hurly-burly world of outside. I recall one dear woman who confided in me to tell me what her husband had just practically forbidden her to vote for a woman. She said, saying that he wanted her to stay at home. He was not going to allow her to vote. He said the men will win anyway. Voters should show women where their proper place was. Well, he used the wrong psychology on her, because that little woman showed him. Not long before the primary election, her husband came to see me, and he told me that his wife had been right and he was wrong, and they were both going to vote for me. Times were a-changing. Since full suffrage had been granted to women, we were eligible to run for any office in the country, and we were equally responsible for the kind of government under which we live. Women's progress had been gradual. Today we have millions of eligible women in the United States, and all should be interested in the party of their choice. It's our duty to understand and ask public questions so that we can vote intelligently on the issues of today. I campaigned in practically every county in the state of Kentucky. One of my pet slogans was, "We can let the men be orators, but we must be the organizers." When the primary was over, I had won a victory for the women in Kentucky. But it also helped the womanhood of the nation. It had been a great victory, and as all elections should be, it was conducted on a high plane. There was no mudslinging, while my opponents were the first to send me telegrams of hearty congratulations when I won. You know, it's a pity that that's not true nowadays. Dear old Allen County, how her people stood by me through thick and thin. I shall never forget the morning that I left Scottsville to make the trip to Frankfort. Many friends came out to say goodbye and God bless you. I have always felt that a mantle of blessing fell on me with the prayers of the good people back home. It was just a covering of courage that gave me the endurance to carry on my work. They come back to me even today. The prayers of Miss Betty Brown, Susie Atwood, Laura Spillman, Mrs. Frank Pitchford, and oh, those prayers of Miss Sylvester Welch. In the national and state elections of 1924, more than 125 women were elected to prominent offices. Chief among those were 2 women governors, Mrs. Nellie Taylor Ross, she was from Wyoming, and the other was Mrs. Miriam Ferguson, and she was from Texas. With my election as Secretary of State in both the primary and the general election, Kentucky became one of the pioneer nations for our state. That was true even though the grand old Commonwealth had been the last to ratify the 19th Amendment, which was for suffrage. Our sister state, Tennessee, was the last. I can hear the echoes and the shouts today that went up in Legislative Hall and that Capitol when my first election ended in triumph. Hooray for the little Pennyroyal girl! You can't beat her! After receiving congratulations and good wishes of friends all over the state, I was very glad to start to plan and dream and attend to the practical problems taking up my residence in Frankfort. Moving to Frankfort, it was there that I went to the theater for the very first time to see a play. The curtain rose on the characters of Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream. Just in front of us, we heard a couple talking during intermission about my race and the victory that I had won. One of them said, "Wouldn't you like to see that little woman who was elected as the state librarian? They say she's attractive. They say she's a college graduate of a fine family, but she was an orphan and without means. She worked her way through school, coaching rich girls from the South. But, you know, she carried off more honors than they did. She was so timid, her friends were worried that she couldn't hold her place. It's hard for me to realize now the stir caused by the entrance of women into the public life on that day." After my election, one dear lady said, "I don't believe in women holding public office. But since they elected Emma, I'm for her heart and soul. But there's one thing I know. She will not run around with bare arms like these other society women do. So I thought you all might be interested to know a little bit about my wardrobe. For the inauguration process and parade, I wore a lovely dark blue cloth with hat and gloves and accessories to match, and I had a Hudson seal coat. My reception gown was made of black velvet with a high neck and long sleeves. I did not have bare arms. Inauguration was on the 8th day of December. The governor and lieutenant governor were sworn in that day, and the rest of us took office on the first Tuesday of January. Actually, it was January the 10th. I remember it just like it was yesterday. My oath of office included the statement that I had not fought a duel with a deadly weapon. A smile went over the audience as the Chief Justice intoned that antiquated part of the solemn oath. The Secretary of State gave me a great opportunity to serve the public by reclaiming priceless documents of the past. In the basement lay barrels and boxes of dusty old records from previous administrations, dating from 1792 to 1924. We began a 2-year effort to clean, catalog, and arrange these papers. This was the initial effort that we know now as our Kentucky Archives. When we completed the filing and the cataloging of those records, I became aware that we had not found any of the 4 constitutions of Kentucky. We searched for them during my term of office, but we were never able to locate them. On one occasion, I remember the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the speaker pro tem left the state of Kentucky to go to New York. Well, by law, the duties of the governor devolved upon the Secretary of State. That brought me the honor of being the first woman to serve as governor of Kentucky. Of course, that fact wasn't publicized. The notion of a woman governor was not yet acceptable. During those days, I issued no pardons. I appointed no colonels. I didn't wish to push our cause too fast. After my term of Secretary of State was concluding, I was nominated to run for state treasurer. Some said the race narrowed down to just one question. What did the women of the Democratic Party think of a woman as a financier? Our entire Democratic ticket won except for the governor. Flem Sampson from over in Barberville was the only member of the Republican ticket to win. I was sworn in as treasurer at 10 o'clock on January the 7th, 1928. I was sworn to take every precaution in handling the finances of our state. I made significant changes in the way the state's finances were held, putting my women's intuition and organization to work. It was not long until every penny that I was responsible for was in vaults, safely, fully bonded on protected credit accounts, with income from interest accumulating day by day. The test of my work as treasurer came on 29 October 1929. I'm sure you all remember that, the day the stock exchange crashed. The Great Depression, it hit like a tidal wave against some peaceful coast. One unforgettable morning, I remember picking up the Courier-Journal, and in black, bold type, read, "The National Bank of Kentucky had closed. In its vaults were $3.2 million of our state's money." I had previously assured that that account was bonded, but what if the bonding companies failed? Well, I'm pleased to say that we collected every dollar, and with 6% interest, over $26,000 of earned interest was added to that $3.2 million, all because I had insisted that the state's money be bonded. Pay as you go was never my idea, but for 6 months during this crisis, we were on a strict cash basis. We, of course, we couldn't do that very long. Road and bridge programs were much too costly. We rode a stormy wave of depression, but we in Kentucky weathered that storm. As my term of office drew to a close, the darkest clouds of depression began to lift, and we could see the silver edges of a rosy coming prosperity. No other state came through this troubled period as well as Kentucky. When my term ended, the state was better off instead of worse off. And I'm proud of that. My service to the public didn't end there. Governor Ruby LaFoon appointed me as the state park director back on May 6th. That was in 1932. He told me we should have a woman as a park director, and he knew that I could fill that place. In one moment, there flashed across my mind, what a difference in attitude toward women in public office in the last 10 years. I like to think that I had something to do with that. I shared a corner in a room with the Progress Commission. I had a desk, and I had a chair, and I had a filing cabinet. There were many beginnings during that time with the state parks. Some of those would be Fort Herod, Butler, Cumberland Falls, Natural Bridge, Blue Licks, Audubon, the Mulkey Meeting House, Thomas Walker, Columbus, Belmont, and many others. I worked to get federal interest and funding for Mammoth Cave, and I used men from the Civilian Conservation Corps for labor to improve our state parks. The Natural Bridge Park was one of the first one to use them. Well, my next venture began when Governor A.B. Happy Chandler appointed me to the State Librarian and Director of Archives. I was sworn in on September the 1st, 1937. One of my first acts was to resume my search for those constitutions of Kentucky. The first constitution was found at the University of Chicago and was returned to our custody and was reposed, was reposed in our state library. The other constitutions were subsequently located and added to the state library collections as well. You know, a friend once said to me, Emma, you don't have any fun. You take life too serious with the world on your shoulders. You're not very modern. My advice to you would get up to date. Be up to date. Do things that others do. And you know, she was very sincere in that advice. But we all have equal rights and privileges in thought, in action, and in deeds. And if we don't want to do certain things that they say are modern, we have the right to do things our own way. And you yours. You know, I would say find work, fit yourself for it, and carry on. My woman's viewpoint is God first in every action. Service, preparedness, energy, promptness, and personality. These high ideas, with a smile, will unlock any door to a great chamber of success for all which we strive. Thank you.
Okay.
Now you take a nail.
Nice talking to you.
There. Top of that wire. Keep that wire tight. But I don't sink it all the way down yet. I'll go around one full wrap to the nail. I'll back it up. Keep tension on the wire so it doesn't come loose. And I go around the nail. Now the broom can't fall apart. Then you take the wire and you break it. And you still got all this ugly mess up here. So you take your knife and we're going to trim it square around. Now, this part I know you can do. You know how to comb hair, right?
Yes.
You need to cut this brush, come on over here and straighten out all the tangles. You go over top, down the side, and under, and then underneath. that's straightening out all the hurl. And it's pulling out any short pieces that we didn't get tied. Okay, can you feel them? Now, you wouldn't want to use that on your hair.
Nope.
All right, thank you very much. Now, where we just tied this on, this is tied on wet. So normally I would just take this off and I would let it dry and sew it flat tomorrow. So normally what I do is I sew 10 brooms today, and I'll have 10 brooms I did yesterday. So I have 10 to sew and 10 to tie when I'm in the mood for tying. And that's how I let them dry, just like that.
Kind of like Dr. Seuss.
And it'll be called chickens and
Yeah,
sheep.
it's called Chicken and Sheets. They keep you awake and you can't sleep.
So tell me sort of a little bit about what you're doing.
Okay, so I am spinning wool into yarn, and this came off of a Jacob's sheep. They're black and white, and the reason they're called Jacob's sheep is the story goes that in the Bible, Jacob, who was one of the patriarchs of the Jewish nation, worked 14 years to get his wife. And his father-in-law, when it was time for them to go, said, "You can't go." And so anyways, Jacob's like to his father-in-law Laban, he said, "Give me my wife, give me my children." And he said, "Yeah, well, you can go, but we're gonna keep everything else." And Laban finally goes, "Okay, you can take all the sheep that are spotted." So Jacob cuts some branches and puts them in front of where the water trough, where the sheep go to make their special connection. And Laban's ewes had a bunch of spotted sheep. And so that's the story of where Jacob's sheep come from. They have big horns and scrawny bodies that have wonderful wool that comes out of them. But that's the kind of wool that I'm spinning today. So this was the white off of it. This will give you an idea of what colors they go together.
And they're dyed, probably colors.
So yeah, this I actually dyed with daffodils. Daffodils out of my yard, and yeah. So then I combed it out on my combs and pulled out some roving, and now we're making a lace weight yarn out of it.